If I should wake before I die, the biblical and medical truth about near-death experiences. H. Leon Green, MD. This was found in the public domain, public access. No copyright infringement was intentional. And we bring it to all for educational purposes alone. If I should wake before I die, the medical and biblical truth about near-death experiences by H. Leon Green, 1944. It has a comment underneath and what's contained within the book. When you come to death's door, do you make a journey of light like some best-selling authors have described? In this book, a Christian cardiologist who has spent his career researching near-death experiences, NDEs, evaluates the validity of these reports. Using sound argument, medical evidence, 22 years of medical studies and practice, and the timeless proofs of Scripture, he responds conclusively to the questions that people's testimonials raise. Can we learn anything about the afterlife from NDEs, or near-death experiences? Are stories of such journeys accurate? Can these experiences possibly be real? Here are definitive answers on what happens when people are critically ill and then resuscitated, and on what the Bible reveals about death and resurrection. Don't get left in the dark about seeing the light. Back cover. Includes biographical references, page 299 to 325, and indexes, and there's a list of what the book contains. A preface, section 1 biblical evidence or other biblical evidence, more questions and conclusions. So let's have a look at this book by H. Leon Green, MD. And here's some acknowledgements of the book, how great it is, from different people, a couple of different people. And it's continued. If I should wait before I die, the medical and biblical truth about near-death experiences by H. Leon Green, MD. And it's dedicated to certain people. Contents page. Contents page continued. Preface. Light of the world or worldly light. Which newspaper headline is the most outlandish? There's three there. Elvis Presley cited buying guitar strings at Kmart in Des Moines. Local construction worker electrocuted, dies, sees Jesus in heaven and returns to tell story. Or UFO snatches entire third grade class from Eisenhower Elementary School. All are equally implausible, but unfortunately the Christian community often chooses to believe the second one. Man seeks answers. He desires to understand. He avoids the unknown. He learns about and prepares for a situation before it occurs. So it should not be a mystery that man has fashioned ideas about what occurs at the time of death. This need to know has been a major force behind most religions. Those religions that promise happiness and peace for all have an immediate audience in the ranks of the seekers. Other religions that teach the concept of good and evil, of reward and punishment, are more difficult for people to accept. Who would choose a system of belief in which there is condemnation for the wicked over a theology that assures love, happiness, warmth and light for all? Even the rogue and the bandit. Therein lies the danger of the cult of the near-death experience, NDE. For millennia, man has feared death, in part because it belongs to the realm of the unseen and the inexplicable. What happens if we encounter a medical crisis and come close to death, but are awakened by a medical team before we die? Are we treated to a celestial journey? Should we expect an NDE like the ones that have received wide publicity in the past few years? Is the NDE a vehicle God uses to impart messages to us? Can we believe the stories allegedly brought back from the dead? The NDE teaches that there are no consequences to man's actions, that you might even get to cheat death and come back. Should we uncritically accept this theology that has generated both confusion in the Christian community and skepticism in the minds of the medical profession? Early comprehensive works on the NDE can be dated to the end of the 1970s, but the recent surge of interest in NDEs came with the 1990s. Authors such as Betty Eadie, Melvin Morse and Raymond Moody have found themselves on the New York Times bestseller list. As a Christian cardiologist, the author views these descriptions of the NDE to be at variance both with his own clinical observations of patients and with his Christian beliefs. It was thus that he began a study of the NDE. The purpose of this book is to evaluate the NDE in light of current medical knowledge and timeless Christian principles. His approach to evaluating the NDE required explanation. It was based upon Christian principles firmly entrenched in the faith. These beliefs have moulded and will continue to affect his interpretation of the medical facts at hand. He believes that the Bible is true and that its principles are unchangeable. Nevertheless, he acknowledges that interpretations of many biblical passages can be as diverse as the men and women reading them. However, the Bible has remained both infallible and immutable throughout the centuries, and it is only the human reading itself that is altered with time. Contrasting with biblical truth is the body of scholarship that we call medical fact. Medicine is not only an imperfect science but an art, and our appreciation of the workings of the human body will change as the synthesis of medical information changes. Much of what is considered to be true today will most certainly be viewed as either false or incomplete by tomorrow. As new information is gained, the sum of opinion will progress towards absolute medical truth, but the process is often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We must reconcile accounts of the NDE with the Bible because so much has been written about the relationship of the NDE to a view of an afterlife. Do NDEs exist? Are they simply the figment of a vivid imagination, or perhaps a fabrication of men and women seeking attention, publicity, or income? Is the NDE really a glimpse of the hereafter? Does the NDE tell us anything about eternity? Can NDEs be explained by current medical knowledge? Is there any danger to the popular interpretations of NDEs? Why not simply believe what has been written about NDEs and accept that they have religious significance? Or are such stories of the NDE both medically unlikely and theologically incorrect? If a single explanation encompasses both all that is known about the NDE and the biblical account of human life and soul, then we should readily accept such a solution. However, if a conflict exists between man's interpretation of the NDE and the Bible, then we must be willing to modify our interpretation of the NDE. Reassessment of our religious beliefs may also be necessary, but we must never compromise faith to accommodate a man-made concept. The Bible is the ultimate authority. Medical hypotheses must also be subject to scriptural truth. Here are the principles that this author uses in his analysis of the NDE. 1. All descriptions of bodily experiences should be analysed for their medical accuracy. Discrepancies between reported physical events and our knowledge of medicine must be resolved. 2. Miracles happen and they are not limited to the past. They still occur. 3. God intervenes in our lives in ways we often don't understand. 4. An afterlife exists. We don't need evidence from the NDE to confirm this foundational principle of Scripture. This book is not written to prove or disprove the eternal existence of the soul. Faith is necessary, and faith by definition cannot be proven, nor can the object of faith be proven. In eternal matters, mankind must abandon the need to know as he clings to his faith. 5. Both angels and demons exist, though their manifestations may be hard to discern, and we must be cautious when we refer to them to explain earthly events. 6. Medical science is most incomplete when it comes to hypotheses regarding perceptions, the mind, memory and conscious experience. 7. Though death is certain, universal and final, many processes can lead to death, and many stages exist between a fully conscious, healthy person and one who dies. Some of the processes are reversible, some are not. The author's interest in the NDE began when he finished his training as an internist, cardiologist and subspecialist in treating patients with cardiac rhythm disturbances. Arrhythmias are abnormalities of the heart's regularity that can lead to what physicians call sudden cardiac arrest. In this condition, the heart stops beating and pumping blood to the rest of the body. Without rapid medical intervention, the patient will die in a few minutes. With the advent of resuscitation techniques in the early 1970s, many of these patients were revived. Some of us objected to the term sudden cardiac death because these patients did not in fact die. They were resuscitated to resume a completely normal existence. Nevertheless, the term sudden cardiac death prevailed, and patients who survived a cardiac arrest are still called sudden cardiac death victims. Early in this author's experience with these patients who had indeed suffered a documented cardiac arrest, he was impressed that none of them described anything that resembled an NDE. Hundreds of these survivors were unanimous in their opinion that they simply passed out and awoke with no memory of any NDE. Some who had read popular accounts of the NDE were disappointed that they had missed out on such a wonderful event. This book is divided into three major sections. 1. A description of the NDE as reported by many popular investigators. 2. A summary of medical knowledge pertaining to the NDE. And 3. A review of biblical examples of death, resuscitation, resurrection, and principles of the spirit, soul, eternity, and afterlife as they relate to the NDE. You will see that parts of the discussion to follow are technical and use necessary medical terminology. The author urges you not to be intimidated by this language, as he has used only that which is essential to the argument, and has also worked hard to explain any material that is technical in nature. He is not merely writing for other physicians or medical researchers, but for all persons who are concerned about issues of the NDE. Each chapter begins with a story of a patient in his practice who illustrates points about the NDE. The names have been changed, of course, as well as any other identifying characteristics, but the stories themselves are true. So join the author as we explore the deceptive theology of the NDE from a Christian medical perspective. Section 1. The near-death experience defined. What is a near-death experience? Dying to live or living to die. James Osborne was a man of faith. He had a strong conviction that heaven was a real place in a blissful eternity that was to be his someday. His confidence came from his belief in Jesus Christ, and he lived his faith day after day. When he suffered his first symptoms of chest pain, though, he did not anticipate that he might be starting a journey to his final reward. The constriction in his chest on that Friday in January was actually rather mild. He had been walking down 4th Avenue in the cool of Seattle's rainy winter. No shoveling snow, not even walking uphill. But the pressure in his chest was unmistakable, and it caused him to stop walking for about 3 or 4 minutes. The pressure eased, and he continued toward his destination at the Federal Building. That's the last he can remember. Even though his co-workers said that he arrived at work at his usual time and worked for about an hour before he collapsed. John Fletcher, another office worker in the same complex, saw him suddenly slump onto his desk without any apparent warning. John had just completed a course in cardiopulmonary resuscitation (CPR) at the Ballard Fire Station, and he began working on James within 30 to 45 seconds of James's loss of consciousness. Sue Thomas, another employee, happened by the scene and called the medics, who arrived in 4 minutes, slightly slower than the 3 that it commonly takes in Seattle. The medics are emergency medical personnel working in Medic 1, Seattle City Ambulance Service. The traffic had been heavy and the rainy streets had slowed them a bit. The medics took over as soon as they arrived. Restoring James's heartbeat took nearly 15 minutes. Soon thereafter, his blood pressure stabilized, and they transported James to Harborview Medical Center, where the medics had done their training and where about 1/3 of all cardiac arrest victims in Seattle are treated. The next 2 days were touch and go. James had obviously suffered a large heart attack, and it surprised James' family when the doctors told him that the heart attack probably had occurred a day or two before his collapse. The collapse was simply a late manifestation of the damage already done to the heart. James had told his family nothing about any chest pains, but he was not a complainer. On the day of his collapse, his rhythm had become erratic and ultimately degenerated to cardiac arrest or ventricular fibrillation, as the doctors called it. James remained in the coma for nearly 48 hours, and the doctors felt that he might have suffered some brain damage from the prolonged period of time without blood circulation to the brain. Over the next 2 weeks, James progressively recovered, and his heart rhythm and pumping capacity improved. But the lack of blood flow to his brain for 19 minutes had obliterated from his memory the entire sequence of events. He could remember the walk down 4th Avenue. He could vaguely remember the chest constriction that had interrupted his walking. But he had lost his memory for the entire 2 hours before the cardiac arrest and the subsequent 3 days. No recollection, not even a hint of that horrible time in the coronary care unit with all of its tubes and machines. James was distressed. He had just been reading about cardiac arrest victims who had wonderful experiences during their unconsciousness. Trips to heaven, blissful colours, a loving being of light, the sense of forgiveness, a new purpose to life. Why had he been robbed of that experience? If he had to go through the heart attack and the subsequent cardiac arrest, at least God could have given him some memory that would reassure him he had been on the right track in his religious quest in life. But no, James felt cheated. James believed that man returns from the dead saw heaven. It was not just a headline from the National Enquirer. He wanted an inspiring story to tell, and he had nothing but a huge blank in his memory. Was he unusual? Should a near-death experience have been expected? He wanted to know. Stories of NDEs are as old as mankind himself, but is the near-death experience have been expected? He wanted to know. Stories of NDEs are as old as mankind himself, but is the near-death experience real? Is the NDE a rehearsal for the real thing? Death that is not interrupted? How can we assess the validity of an experience that is so intensely personal and that does not lend itself to investigation or experimentation? It is sent from God as a revelation to mankind? Or is it sent from God as a revelation to mankind? Does it contain unique truths? Or is it the Loch Ness monster of religion? That elusive vision that everyone wants to believe but that no one is able to prove? Is the NDE sent from God, from Satan, or does it simply find its origin in man's imagination? Historically, all cultures have feared death. Mankind ultimately wants love, peace, freedom from pain, release from the clutches of the unknown, and assurance of an afterlife. Most of us refuse to accept the notion that our lives might end at death. We all desire to live throughout eternity. Therefore, most cultures have reported previewing the afterlife through visions and dreams. Art in all societies has depicted the spirit or soul of man hovering above the body at the time of death. Tales of travel through time and space at our death have been chronicled in all cultures. What then is the NDE? Is it real? Can our faith hinge upon the insights revealed in the NDE? Can we trust the popular descriptions? These questions are all relevant to the Christian life today. In order to understand the issue raised by the concept of the NDE, we must evaluate the reports of this phenomenon. Let's take each of the popular books in the sequence in which they were published and see if we can decipher their message. The Gurus of the NDE. Dying to sell or dying to sell? Dying to self or dying to sell? Sam Lundquist had just been through the worst 2 weeks of his life. First came the cardiac arrest, then 5 days in the intensive care unit. After his resuscitation, now the convalescence in the telemetry unit of the hospital, where he was undergoing many tests to determine why he had experienced the cardiac arrest in the first place. Would this ordeal never end? The endless questioning by the medical staff was almost insulting. Where were you when you collapsed? What did your chest feel like just before you lost consciousness? What do you remember about awakening? How does your chest feel now? But the worst was that social worker, Sue Cook. She kept asking all of those questions about his memory for the events that had occurred when he was unconscious. Was she a fool? I was unconscious. I don't remember anything, Sam repeatedly told her. But she would not take no for an answer. She kept drilling him. What did you see? Did you pass through a tunnel? Was there a bright light at the end of the tunnel? Did you see your higher power? Did your life pass before you? Her questions were not only persistent, they were leading. She seemed to have an agenda to prove. And what did all this have to do with social work anyway? She was supposed to be helping Sam with his financial affairs and with his unemployment compensation. Little did Sam know that Sue was writing a book about people who had experienced cardiac arrest. She certainly was located in the right place, though. Harborview Medical Centre was the premier hospital in the world for such problems. The medics in Seattle were based there, and they brought many of their cardiac arrest victims to Harborview for initial treatment. And goes on and on like that. Okay, he finally gives up because she keeps asking questions. He just tells her what she wants to hear, and she walks away. Or because she wanted to write a book. Okay, on that near-death experiences. Okay, there's a person here called Raymond Moody, raised a Presbyterian, later a Methodist, had no first-hand experience with the NDE. He denied any familiarity with the occult and acknowledged that no proficiency in theological matters, having both a PhD in philosophy and a medical degree. C6. Okay. He claimed no intention to prove the existence of life after death, etc. Moody described 3 settings for the NDE in this original volume. 7. Experiences of people who, by report, came close to death from some illness, cancer or injury, and who were resuscitated from a state in which they were thought, adjudged or pronounced clinically dead by the doctors. 2. Experiences of people who had a close call with death, but who were not judged clinically dead by a physician. 3. Experiences of people who were dying and who related the experiences to bystanders as they actually died. He described the sequence of the dying process as a number of separate stages, although admitting that very few people have all stages, that there is no defining feature of the NDE, that the order may be varied, and that many people report none of the stages. 1. Ineffability, difficulty in reporting the event because of its uniqueness and the inadequacy of language to relay the essential features of the experience. 2. Hearing the news, hearing the medical personnel say that the person has died, that it's over. 3. Feelings of peace and quiet. Patients say that they are then overcome with an unimaginable calm or peace. 4. The noise. Next is a sensation of a noise, verbally described as a roaring, rushing, buzzing or ringing that can be uncomfortable or unpleasant. However, some report the sound to be like bells or music that is actually comforting or pleasant. 5. The dark tunnel. The person's vision then begins to dim, often with loss of peripheral vision, simulating a trip down a long tunnel. During this time they may have the feeling of falling, tumbling, or moving toward the end of the tunnel at an ever-increasing speed. Out of the body. A detachment from the body, floating or even actually hovering around or over the body. Some reports describe the person giving a detached running account of events that were occurring during a resuscitation process. Moody describes these released entities as spirits or souls that have a new and altered perception of the surroundings. 7. Meeting others. At this stage of the NDE, a person may encounter persons from the past, often long since dead, though described as spiritual beings. 8. The being of light. Moody then relates what he calls the most incredible common element in an NDE, the encounter with a bright light, almost always in the form of a person. It may begin as a light at the end of the tunnel, but as the sequence changes and the person seems to travel toward the end of the tunnel, the light becomes brighter and more encompassing, and it often finally assumes the form of a person, sometimes in the form of an angel, a deceased relative, or an unidentified holy person. The all-encompassing nature of the light and the sense of warmth and love emanating from the light are fundamental. The identification of the person, though, seems to be largely a function of the religious background, training, or beliefs of the person involved. While difficult to describe, the next element of the phase is the communication that takes place between the dying person and the being of light. It is often said to be a direct transfer of feelings or thoughts, or a communication without words, or probably telepathy. The dying person then is asked if it is time to end his life, if he did on earth what he was supposed to do, or if his life was complete. These questions are always asked in a loving manner without judgment or condemnation. 9. The review. Patients then conduct in some fashion a life review. During this time the dying person sees his past life displayed rapidly in great detail. Here, Moody uses a description from a person who was only scared by an accident, was never in a medical crisis, but who nevertheless had an NDE with a life review. 10. The border or limit. And it goes on. Moody's account is confusing to the reader. He didn't document the physical condition in most of his case examples, and many of those that were documented were definitely not near death. Moody continued his account by alluding to some parallels between his subjects and descriptions in the Bible, citing Paul's encounter with the light on the road to Damascus. He noted that Paul did not experience any near fatal physical travail at that time. Moody further cited reports from Plato 9, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead 10, and from the Scientific Emmanuel Swedenborg 11 to 12. By citing these sources together, Moody attributed the credibility of the Bible to these occult or mystical sources. He blurred the distinctions among the various works, and by doing so, he painted the NDE as a universal phenomenon with deep but undifferentiated historical and spiritual roots. Moody's second book concluded with a revised classification system for the conditions and circumstances that might precipitate the NDE. The person has a close call. The person is seriously ill or injured, but never experiences clinical death. The person is seriously ill and he meets criteria for clinical death. 4. The person is seriously ill as number 3 with criteria for clinical death, etc. It continues. Moody alleged that in rare circumstances a person could have a component of a vision of the future, or what he called a flash forward, with a profound effect on the subsequent life of the traveller. No fear of dying, sensing the importance of love, a sense of connection with all things, an appreciation of learning, a new feeling of control, a sense of urgency, better developed spiritual side, difficulty re-entering the real world. Moody admitted that NDE has strong ties to Mormon doctrine, which espouses the validity of returning from death. He said, the Mormon doctrine supports the NDE as a peek into the spirit world. They believe that the spirit world is a dimension that can't be perceived by the living, but one that is inhabited by those who have left their physical body. Mormon tradition is replete with descriptions of the NDE as chronicled by Lundahl. Many of the traits of the NDE are described by Mormon leaders themselves. One leader says, the brightness and glory of the next apartment is inexpressible, similar to the description of being engulfed by the soothing light. Another Mormon leader says that there, as here, all things will be natural and you will understand them as you now understand natural things, which is in keeping with many NDEs who claim to experience a kind of universal understanding. Mormon leaders say that some spirits who have experienced death are called back to inhabit their physical bodies again. These persons pass through the natural or temporal death twice. We should examine further the background of the NDE researchers. Who is Raymond Moody? Often described as a medical philosopher, early in his career he dabbled in practices that would be considered occultic by many Christians, and so forth. Fundamentalists of whatever stripe, be it Christian, Jew, psychiatric or psychologist, are people who become transfixed by cognitive structure, meaning that they obsess on an inflexible system of beliefs. They protest new ideas or inventions that somehow impinge on their rigid inner structures. Religious fundamentalists will voice their old refrain, this is the work of Satan. Psychological fundamentalists have similar refrains as well. I have never seen this, so it can't be true. He acknowledged that the Bible warns against these practices. Do not practice divination or sorcery, Leviticus 19:26. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them, Leviticus 19:31. I will set my face against the person who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute himself by following them, and I will cut him off from his people, Leviticus 26. And it's basically talking to the Israelites, isn't it? The house of Israel. There's some more people it's talking about. Ken Robertson, John Owen, so forth. Okay, it comes down to a person called Katie who saw Jesus, God the Father, and an angel named Elizabeth during her NDE. Morse claimed that she had no concept of religion that would have biased her story, but later points out that Katie was a middle-of-the-road Mormon. And the original article states the patient was from a deeply religious Mormon background. Morse claimed that it was necessary for the patient to be actually near death to have an NDE. He then proceeded to tell of the pre-death vision experience, which does not depend upon physical manifestation of the dying process, and reported or cited many cases of NDE in which the patient was never close to death. A girl reports an NDE after falling to the floor and striking her head. A boy is rescued from a car being swept down river in a flood, though no report of any physical injury is included, and so forth. A main emphasis in Moore's book is the powerful force in the bright light, by far the overwhelming aspect of the experience. He admitted that it can be influenced by a person's prior concept of religion and the afterlife. He attempted to homogenize religions to arrive at a universalist approach by citing examples of light in various religions and cultures. Native American spiritual leader Black Elk had a near-fatal illness at age 9 that put him in touch with the light. In Autobiography of a Yogi, the Indian guru Paramahansa Yogananda describes his near-death experience at age 8, which then enhanced his lifelong devotion to religion. The religious implications of the light were described more than 200 years ago by Jonathan Edwards, the Calvinist theologian. And so forth. And goes through different stories by different people. As an article of literature, Embraced by the Light clearly met the needs, this is a book, met the needs of a large segment of the American population. As a testimony of religious truth, however, it falls short. The description of her journey, this particular lady, Betty Eadie, is one of the most detailed yet published, but there are too many gaps in the story to allow us to analyse the medical aspects of the case. The reader is referred to Richard Ibanez's extensive analysis of Edie's work, entitled Embraced by the Light, and the Bible, for a more in-depth discussion of the theological aspects of Edie's book. He comprehensively analyses the Mormonism and New Age belief present in Betty Eadie's Embraced by the Light book. He reveals her Mormon roots, exposing the financial backing for the publication of this book, of this work, and he surprises most readers by revealing that 2 versions of the book were published, one for Mormon consumption and one for the larger and more profitable nationwide distribution, $4.99 He explains many false Mormon doctrines in Edie's book, including 1. We are literally God's physical offspring. 2. God is just a man. 3. Polytheism is acceptable. 4. We can become gods ourselves. 5. Everyone will be saved. 6. All religions are valid. 7. There is no judgment. 8. Everyone achieves peace at death. 9. Sins don't matter. 10. We can choose whether to return to our bodies after death. This is a story about Danny and Brinkley. What's this? The Mormon Tabernacle in Salt City. During his NDE, he saw a great, this guy's on the other page, saw a city of grand cathedrals. Danny and Brinkley. Like those of France or the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, as he described them, the 13 beings of light filled him with knowledge, etc., etc. He was told a number of things that were to guide his life after his return. For example, humans are great, powerful and mighty spiritual beings, 1 and 4. Brinkley was also told that he was to create spiritual capitalism there on the earth. He was shown 7 rooms that were to be the prototype for stress reduction clinics to be built on earth, and each one was similar to an ancient oracle. When asked how he was to build them, he was told, don't worry, it'll come to you. He saw the medical practice of the future, in which it will be revealed that every cell of the body vibrates at a certain frequency. When these frequencies become incorrect, disease supervenes. Okay. In the midst of his experience, he heard a chant that apparently was the heavenly mantra, Allahum. This chant is remarkably similar to the names of God, to one of the names of God, Elohim, giving this mantra a counterfeit religious sound. He concluded by quoting one of his own statements given on Russian television. There are many paths to righteousness, I said, and that's good news for all of us, since no one seems to be on the same path as far as I can tell. In all these descriptions, Brinkley revealed, could be Elohim, could be close to that, I'm not too sure now. His Mormon leanings, comparing the cathedrals he saw to the beauty of the Mormon tabernacle, and his NDE to the NDEs of the Mormons' general of discourse. His refusal to believe in the judgment for our actions on the earth. His belief that humans are good and powerful spiritual beings, in contrast to the Bible, which says that all men are corrupt and fallen. None are good, but the Father is good alone. His profit motive by which he was to create clinics and promote spiritual capitalism. His lack of timelessness in revealing the future prophecy and only after the events had occurred. His leanings toward euthanasia. His belief that all religions are equally valid or invalid. A dangerous book indeed by this Danion Brinkley. Okay, more researchers, NDE researchers. Gets into all these statistics and stuff. And goes into these claims by a person called Blackmore onto Morris Rawlings, Tennessee cardiologist. The Christian concept of salvation challenges these stories, these NDEs that include trips both to heaven and hell. This author is absolutely convinced that both heaven and hell exist and that what the Bible says about them is true. But we will see later that such near-death experiences often produce accounts that are at variance with the Bible's teachings. That's what we found. We've looked at a lot of them and they're all different. Some of them are like contradicting the Bible. Some patients have a brush with death and see Buddha, so we cannot use the NDE as a representation of the afterlife. We must reject the theology of the NDE. Well, the last one that we looked at, a man said, well, you see what you want to see. Whatever you believe in, that's what you'll see. If you imagine that Jesus is black, then he'll be black. If you imagine he's a white man, he'll be a white man. Yeah, something along those lines. You see what you want to see, according to this guy. On this recent YouTube video, it said he died and came back. God told him something. All this sort of stuff. He goes into all these different Eastern religions and how they view things. Hinduism assumes that mankind is basically good and that we can ascend in reincarnated form until nirvana is reached. Other Eastern religions, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism teach similar principles. Reincarnation is important to all of them as well. Christianity, however, teaches the concept of the fall of man in the Garden of Eden and so forth. And he gets to questions about the NDEs. Goes into Tibetan Book of the Dead. And lots of questions asked. Lots of claims. And it looks like Hindu people see Hindu things or Indian things. Someone saw the Buddha. Someone saw a tree with Ram Ram written on it. Section 2, Medicine and Near-Death Experience. We're not going to cover that because you'll probably get a copyright claim or strike or something. Central nervous system, your body has a lifetime guarantee. Central nervous system, normal anatomy and physiology of the brain. There's a picture of the brain. Brain anatomy and function.